Okay, so Saturday night video. As many of you know, I mean, at least the people who've been, watching my videos for a number of years, you have to know by now what is happening in the Middle East. Namely, that the entire project for the new American century is proceeding according to plan. And just a memory refresher here, you need to really reread the key document in all of this, which is called Rebuilding America's Defenses. Because everything that we're seeing going on in the Middle East today is essentially based on that document. And I would go even further to say that it doesn't just concern the Middle East per se, but also, sorry, I had a window pop up here, but also things going on in the South China Seas in regards to the policy, U.S. foreign policy in regards to China. So, but let's start today. Let's start with Libya and what's going on there. Okay. Basically, I mean, regardless of what has happened in Libya in terms of the killing of the U.S. ambassador there, the entire thing was pretty much predictable from the start. And essentially, it's called blowback to misguided American foreign policy. So here's the situation in Libya today. Chaos and destruction and decay. This is the look of Libya that used to be a blooming country a year after the beginning of NATO strikes. And in mid-February of 2011, mass demonstrations demanding the resignation of Gaddafi, who ruled the country for 41 years, started in Libya. Now, I'm not talking about all Middle East demonstrations here, far from it, but that was one aspect of it. And I also want to make clear that I'm not, a supporter of Gaddafi. These are just pertinent facts you need to know about. Basically, these protests grew into armed confrontation between the regime of Gaddafi and the opposition, which was then backed up by NATO and the United States. This opposition then formed the Transitional National Council in Benghazi that was declared the only legitimate authority in the country. After several months of bombing and fighting, the cost to that country were nearly 50,000 casualties, and the ruling regime was overthrown. Gaddafi was killed on October 20th, 2011, and the whole sort of thing was captured via cell phones and essentially broadcast all over the world. A disturbing trend in reality television, complete with cheering. After the fall of the Gaddafi regime, all the worst case scenarios came to life in that country. The coming to power of radical Islamists, tribal massacres, genocide of the Tuareg and Tubu, complete disorder in the economy, and ultimately what we're witnessing is the collapse of an entire state. clear confirmation of this is the process that centralized in early March, when representatives of the eastern clans had decided to separate from the rest of the country. On March the 6th, according to several sources and several leaders of the Libyan tribes present, and a number of field commanders and so on at that meeting in Benghazi, announced that the important oil-rich region stretching from the city of Sirte, located in the central part of the country, a central part of the country to the bordering Egypt, was to be declared semi-autonomous. That is, the profits from the operation must now be directed towards the Benghazi piggy bank. In other words, the Benghazi piggy bank are essentially Western banking interests and conglomerates. Of course, this caused outrage in Tripoli, where the National Transitional Council, so to speak, all favored by Western powers, but that essentially controls nothing in Libya. And its head, Mustafa Abdel Jalil, threatened to use military force against several clans. And this didn't materialize because there is a complete power vacuum in Libya now. And so he doesn't have any concerted military force to fight against anything because everybody is fighting amongst themselves now. This is the reality in Libya today. So, while the entire Western propaganda machine labeled the anti-Gaddafi forces as pro-democracy fighters, the fact is that from the very outset, this fractious, ill-disciplined bunch of militias in Libya would have never won without NATO support to start with. And they're fighting over tribal difficulties, economic difficulties, and religious discontent. This, to Gaddafi's credit, never happened in Libya. Now, Libya, you have to understand, the whole country of Libya is sort of a mishmash of tribes. And so even though Libya was under, essentially a totalitarian government under Gaddafi, he actually did share the country's oil wealth with the rest of the population. So it isn't as if, he didn't share the oil wealth. He hedged his bets with Western powers and with the Soviets along the line. But he essentially tried to maintain his independence from everyone. And his downfall was essentially trusting Western powers too much after this, entire Lockerbie incident and intelligence failures and so on. The situation in Libya is extremely complicated, to say the least. But Western propaganda is not helping in this situation because essentially it's being declared as a success. There is no success in Libya. What we're witnessing is a failing state. The complete disintegration of a civilized society. Thanks to Western intervention. And, without any kind of form of centralized government in Libya, of course it's going to turn into some big, gigantic chaos. And that may actually have been the plan all along, is to get the factions fighting amongst each other while the big banks, the global banks, can basically rob them and the Libyan people of their resources. What we have in Libya today is essentially, you make the law up as you go along, and nobody is safe, especially not civilians. People are keeping, probably most Libyans are trying to keep their heads down, in order not to be in the crossfire of extremists on all sides. And the revenge killings and the torture in Libya has gotten worse under this new regime than it ever was under Gaddafi. In January of this year, Doctors Without Borders essentially pulled out of that country because they realized that they were essentially helping people, treating people who had been tortured, for them to become well enough only to be tortured again. So we're talking about a complete breakdown in that country. And this is what the West is celebrating as a success in the Middle East. Now, as you know, there are lots of other things going on, in particular Syria and of course the big question mark is Iran. Now, the situation in Syria is equally complicated, but what we're looking at is essentially the Saudis, the House of Saud, is struggling to remain in power in their own country. And the House of Saud is entirely corrupt, and supported by Western powers simply because of the oil deals. But they're the ones who are funding the same extremist factions now operating in the country of Syria, trying to overthrow the Assad regime. Now, we're talking about autocratic governments all around. Make no mistake about it, the Assad regime, they are not angels. Everything points towards total control in various aspects, and that there's no notion of any democracy either under the Assad regime nor the incoming rebels. But I would venture a guess. I think the retributions being that are going to come about if these rebel factions actually win, and they're Western supported, by the way, the situation is going to deteriorate even further in terms of human rights. And for anybody to think that the West is intervening in Syria because of human rights concerns, please, get a grip. This has nothing to do with human rights or about humans at all. This has to do with control, geopolitical control of the region. The United States just signed one of the biggest arms deals with Saudi Arabia in recent memory. And the U.S. economy is failing, so arms deals are good for business, no matter what. So don't forget that. And this constant warmongering rhetoric coming from the United States and from Israel on our public networks, on our public airwaves in the United States is nothing else but atrocious. The Iranian regime poses no threat to the Western world whatsoever. We may not like their regime. We may not like what they have to say. But they're certainly not crazy enough, even if they had a nuclear weapon, to launch a first strike. because their entire country would be basically annihilated within 30 minutes. Even a limited military strike by Israel in conjunction with the United States would bring about absolute chaos in the entire Middle East. This must be prevented, and Western people must speak out against this insanity. Because rest assured, if Iran is attacked, they will fight back. They're not just going to sit there and take it. They don't have nuclear weapons. They can fight a conventional war, as they did, during the Iran-Iraq war. And their air defenses and military is far more sophisticated than Iraq ever was. They don't have to mine the Straits of Hormuz. They don't even have to do this. Once strikes are launched against Iran, all they have to do is fire their very sophisticated missiles against all shores which have oil terminals in Saudi Arabia, in other various regions, and you won't have to worry about the Straits of Hormuz anymore, because there won't be any oil coming into the tankers which are trying to get through the Straits of Hormuz. So please, hopefully some sanity reigns here. I mean, realistically, this back and forth could possibly not only trigger a huge regional war in the Middle East, but most of all, a world war. Because Russia and China is not just going to sit idly by while this happens. Especially with increasing tensions in the South China Seas. And the obvious intent of neocon policies and neoliberalism that's going on, and the objective, to basically have control over all resources in perpetuity. So the situation regarding Iran is very, very serious. Very serious. If any war is launched against Iran, it will have very serious repercussions for every American. If you think the oil crisis of 1975 was bad, think about what would happen if Iran is attacked. And I'm not just, appealing towards the monetary concerns of the ordinary Americans. No, because your price at the gas pump will immediately shoot up to $10 per gallon, and almost inevitably right away. Now this may, be alleviated after 3-4 months or so. But the instability in that region alone will essentially bring about worldwide economic collapse, And of course, the hardliners think that the more wars you instigate, the more you spur on the economy, because it benefits the arms dealers. That is a very dubious proposition, I think. Because I think that kind of strategy will not work. And it won't work. It will completely backfire. So yeah, talk about blowback. I don't think we've seen anything yet.